Good morning, everyone. I want to go over a couple announcements that are posted just to give you some guidance. Some people do better hearing it rather than just reading it. So this is a list of your projects, and there's two groups because in the next two units you'll have discussion boards and you will only have 10 or 11 people in your group. That way you don't have to read 21 posts. So that'll make your discussions more meaningful. That's why you're listed in groups. The other thing about these projects, just to be clear, and it is in the syllabus and other places, you are creating this project for a group of people. You're not creating the project for us about a disease. So, for example, Miranda told me already that she's doing her project for seniors. So Miranda's going to develop a social media page about osteoarthritis for senior citizens. So what she chooses to put in that social media page is somewhat impacted by her population. When you look at the scoring rubric for your project, if you create something for us, to us, then you will lose 2 letter grades. So please make sure that you're thinking about in this as you're wrapping up this first unit, what would be a good population for you to address. Alexis already told me she's doing seniors. I will be updating the approved project list in the information section, but this is what I have now. The reason why slides has a question mark next to it for everyone is that slides are the most difficult project to do, and that is because when you do slides, you tend to fall into a report type discussion where you're reporting to us about people and about the disease. And that's not what you're supposed to be doing. If you can create slides that are to a population that's about the condition that is relevant to them, that's okay. But that's very hard to do because you're used to addressing your peers and your teachers. The purpose of you creating this for a population is that you are going to create something that you could possibly use in the real world or possibly use it as a format for other topics that you want to address with your population. So that's why you're doing this for a population and not to us. And so you can see, for example, endometriosis is going to be slides to Black women of childbearing age. Again, if you have slides and you want to change, that's fine. In reality, anything that you have as a format, or if you want to change your disease, you just have to let me know first so I can confirm it. Because if you look at the list and who's in your discussion board, there are no two people with the same disease in either discussion board. So, for example, if you wanted to change your topic, you cannot change it to a disease that somebody else is already doing. So that's the key points that I want to talk about with this project, and that is I want you to start to think about who your population is, and you'll be able to address that in the first discussion board in Unit 2, but you need to really start to think about that. The other one I want to talk about is social determinants of health, because these are things that you need to think about when we're talking about your projects. Let me slide this over. There we go. All right, so this is an announcement also, and these are questions you need to be addressing in your paperwork and your assignments that you're doing from this point forward and discussions. You need to think about how these social determinants of health impact the disease, not how the disease impacts the social determinant of health. This is a public health perspective because in reality, diseases and conditions typically just don't appear equally across all populations and all people. There are inequities that happen, and those inequities tend to be related to these social determinants of health. So for education, you should be asking, do people with higher or lower education have more or less of this condition? And then, are their outcomes better or worse? And then, which groups of people have higher or lower education levels? People, for example, in this one, people with lower education levels for most of your diseases have higher risk. There are a couple of your diseases that you're doing that people with higher education actually have greater risk. But you need to start to think about, well, who are those people at risk? And are any of those groups of people a group that you want to create this deliverable for? Economic stability. Do people with higher or lower economic stability have a greater risk for this disease or condition? Are their outcomes better or worse? And then, do certain groups of people have higher or lower economic stability? I'll give you one example. Women typically have lower economic stability than men. So, are women a group that you want to address in your disease or condition? And so that's something to think about. And there's lots of different groups of people that have less economic stability. Typically, white men have the greatest economic stability. The built environment and neighborhood. What in the built environment promotes behaviors related to your condition or disease? And what needs to be in place to promote healthy behaviors? And so I think this is one of the more difficult ones to think about, but you need to think about, for example, are there specific infrastructure issues in urban or rural communities that increase or decrease risk? Which environments have higher risks for your disease? And then in those environments, what is the infrastructure that's missing that needs to be put into place? Social and community context. This covers a lot of different things. Make sure you look at the slides on this and do the readings on what social context actually includes, because there's a lot of things here. Relationships and interactions with family and peers and coworkers and within the community all impact your condition or diseases. And what makes it better or worse? What people are more likely to have deficits in this area that would impact your disease? And the last one, access to care. Remember, access to care are things that make things less accessible. And so, for example, health insurance is one thing that everyone should consider. There's lots of other things in there, and I've left you notes on your assignments if you've submitted the social determinants of health assignment already. For example, do people with health insurance have better or worse risk, or greater or less risk for your disease or condition? And do they have better or worse outcomes? That's important. And then, which groups of people have less access to health insurance? Again, is that a group of people that you want to address for your deliverable? Remember, your deliverable is to a group of people. So I want to encourage you to ask these questions when you're talking about social determinants of health. What does the social determinant of health do to the condition or disease, or the prevention of it, or the treatment of it, or the outcomes for it? Rather than thinking about what does the disease do to these social determinants of health, we want to start to think about, how do social determinants of health, how do the things around all of us actually impact us and put us at greater risk for certain conditions? If you have questions, make sure you ask. Tomorrow on Friday, I will post another announcement, since we're going to be ending the unit and starting a new one. I've enjoyed reading your work so far, and keep up the good work.